In the TG case, we see that substantial movement and substantial time can be can be satisfied by things that involve very low numbers. So in this case, the 6-year-old victim of this crime was there was some sort of neighborhood fight or something, and the defendant in this case, the grabs the 6-year-old playing with her daughter, and apparently they get into a tiff, and the mom of the other kid yanks the victim into the house, into her house, and the question is whether this constitutes kidnapping. And so she's held there for 30 minutes before she's ultimately released. And she says it's because she's angry at the child and she's going to do bad things to the child's mom. So the question then becomes whether this 30-minute detention in the neighbor's house constitutes either a substantial movement of the victim or a substantial length of time. And the court says that it's both. And here's why. Because the court says it doesn't have to be miles to constitute substantial distance. The court says that we aren't looking at this in absolute numbers, but rather the question is whether you are taken to a completely different environment. Whether you have been moved substantially is essentially the question of whether you have been moved to a completely different environment. And here the 6-year-old child was taken from playing in the neighbor's yard to being detained inside the neighbor's house. That's a substantially different environment than being outside. And of course, it's also isolated from the public. But then the question is, what about time? Is 30 minutes a substantial length of detention to constitute kidnapping? And the court says yes, and we don't look at time in terms of simply like a stopwatch. We don't say it's 5 minutes or 2 hours or 3 days. We look at it contextually and whether this would be a serious intrusion upon a person to whom it's been done, and we look at that from the perspective of the victim. And this victim here was 6 years old, who found this incredibly troubling, and was crying and was quite upset by the whole thing. And so in this instance, the court holds that even that which seems like a relatively brief period of time, given the effect it had on the 6-year-old child, was sufficient, in this context to be both not only a substantial amount of time, but a substantial movement of the victim, enough to constitute kidnapping within the meaning of Pennsylvania's kidnapping statute.